Welcome to another episode of the Thinking and Well Why podcast, part of the Awareness to Action podcast network. My name is Creek, and I'm here with my co-hosts Mari Secor and Lee Fields, who own every tool in the box and reach for the same one every time. That Daily Delusion brought to you by Gary Klein, Sources of Power. Mario, have you read that one?
I have, in fact. It's an excellent book. Gary Klein is a really good writer and theorist on intuition in particular, and Sources of Power focuses on his study. It derives from his work studying experts in high-risk environments, particularly firefighters and jet pilots. And so he and there's a great discussion, might have been in the Harvard Business Review or McKinsey's journal, between him and Daniel Kahneman, talking about, what they see similarly and what they see differently. So I highly recommend Gary Klein. Fundamentally, in part of our work, we talk about the difference between immature intuition and mature intuition, right? Naive intuition and mature intuition. And firefighters, jet pilots, people like that, particularly fighter jet pilots, are great examples of people who develop really highly tuned expert intuition. The firefighter who walks into a room and says, hey, this, feels that this floor is going to collapse. So they step back. And the fighter pilot who can't consciously think about what they're doing, but reacts. But it's all through trained expertise in dangerous situations. So,
right.
I bet you got more than you thought you'd get on that one, huh? So
always do. Well, let me finish my intro here.
Yeah.
Folks, if you
so
haven't
that's all
listened,
the time we have, folks.
If you haven't listened to the previous episode, this is the episode we owe you because we were more long-winded than we previously anticipated. So.
Yes, we were.
Yeah. We were, yes. Last episode we were talking about the different ways of knowing, what that means to us. You hear that phrase going on everywhere, and everyone means something different. So we're trying to define our terms here a little bit more. So more conceptually, we talked about it last week, and I think we're going to try to get a little bit more specific practically than philosophically. But we all kind of trend towards philosophically,
yes,
rather quickly. So
don't worry, we'll work some of it in.
Yes,
yeah. We're like 3 stone sophomores in a dormitory or something. Like, man, how do we know that that's green that you see?
Yeah.
Oh, there are different ways of
concept.
Yeah.
Mario, can you let's talk about the categories, the ways of knowing. Can you give us a little recap of our terms?
I can. So, last time we talked about different epistemic categories. And again, I'm sure we've covered this before, but it never hurts to repeat that epistemology is the branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of truth. Okay. How can we know the things that we can know? And, what should we be careful about assuming we know when we can't, et cetera. So it's all about how we know stuff. And so epistemological tools are, the tools we use for sorting through, what we can know and what we can't, and what is nonsense and what is not, and what is bunk, and, what is good faith error, and so forth and so on. So whenever we are trying to know something, and whatever that means to us. And last time we each had kind of slightly different takes on how we think of what it means to know. And all 3 of those takes were valid, right? Because it's a broad concept. But there are certain tools we use for knowing different things. I generally break these down into 3 epistemic, categories, right? So it's, 2 really, but we'll get into some of the tools underneath them. But it's basically, okay, what are objective facts? Are we talking about something that is true, whether we feel it or believe it or recognize it or not? And if so, that's, kind of in the domain of objective knowledge or objective facts, right? Is there a dark side of the moon? Yeah. Yeah, I don't care if you believe it or not, but, we objectively know that because of, various proof points. Um, but is chocolate better than vanilla? Well, yes, to some people and no to others, right? And, and it all depends how you feel about it. And this is where we are talking about subjective experience. Okay. So, and that's something that it's true to me because I feel so, or it's valid. Valid's a better word, right? So it's not even something that we can say is true, but it's valid for me, even if it's not valid for you. We always have to be careful which of those things that we are addressing, and there are different tools for addressing topics in each of those two categories.
Vanilla is superior to chocolate.
Uh,
It's a valid opinion.
It is a valid opinion, and but I think in some circumstances it is. For example, there are these protein drinks that I drink, and I like the vanilla ones more than I like the chocolate ones. But if you offer me ice cream, I'm going to choose the chocolate over the vanilla, typically. So again,
we told the people we weren't going to get philosophical,
yes.
So let's stay out of.
Well, these are very
chocolate and
practical
vanilla,
issues. Yeah.
I think that the validity versus truth language is really helpful because when you're taking two different positions, opposing positions perhaps, and each of you, two people perceiving that there is a truth, right? You're sort of fighting over limited territory.
Mhm.
There can be only one. If this is the binary that we're setting up.
Right.
But you can sort of break the tyranny of that by saying validity versus truth. It's a lower standard that's more inclusive.
Yeah. Well, I think we can say it's a different standard, right?
Yeah.
Because
True.
rather than lower or less so, right? Because again, our subjective experiences matter to us, right? I mean,
For sure.
if a certain piece of music moves us, or a certain book moves us, or a certain movie moves us, and somebody else doesn't like it, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are less in any way. They just have different tastes, and that's okay. And as always, the problem comes when we conflate ways of knowing, right? When we think that the tools that we use for subjective experience or evaluating a subjective experience are the same as the tools we should use for evaluating an objective claim.
This might not go anywhere. But
well, gee, that would be a first, right?
Let me sell it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Give you all a moment to recover from the
you
shock.
Those are the magic words editors want to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Get ready, Creek. Mark the time. Talking about the tools to use for a task. If we're trying to discern the ice cream question, chocolate or vanilla, which is better? Our sense of hearing is not going to do much. Right. But our sense of touch wouldn't do much. It's cold. Right. But taste and smell and possibly sight are going to be better tools for evaluating how to form our opinion about the ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's just bringing it back to different tools for different tasks and when to hand off those to pick up a different tool.
Yeah.
And to that point of, you maybe smell ice cream, you're like, I don't smell anything.
Mm-hmm.
But then if your nose is plugged, you're not going to taste anything either. And so like we're making false distinctions between taste and smell, even though you can use them separately, they are also dependent on each other.
Yeah.
True.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is where subjectivity is so, important to understand, right, in certain things. So, yeah. How about if we talk about what some of the tools for evaluating objective topics are? Okay, I think we can start there and then maybe make our way into the subjective tools.
Yeah.
But so again, this is going to vary. So if we think of a tool for objective understanding, again, we want to evaluate what the task is, right? If I'm trying to solve a number problem, if I'm trying to reconcile the books, so I'm trying to, figure out, how many days the ice cream is going to last based on a particular serving size, et cetera, we're getting into mathematics. And mathematics is probably the only truly reliable, objective way of knowing anything. Now we can add in, of course, there is, Fermat's incompleteness theory, right? I think it's Fermat. And so even mathematics to some extent, is not wholly perfect and reliable, but for the most part it is, right? 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, that's just, one of the things about math is that it's by definition, right? We have established, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, maybe this is a different thing entirely, but with math, yes, it is one of the most predictable things if you do it right.
Yeah.
But then how you translate it, if you don't know how to read statistics, you're going to get the wrong answer from it.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. And that's kind of a different issue, right? Mm-hmm. Now we're getting into interpretation of data, which is different from the mathematics themselves. Okay.
Correct.
Well, yeah, what I'm talking about here is addition, multiplication, subtraction, et cetera. Okay.
Arithmetic.
Arithmetic, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, and again, it's because of definition. It's definitionally objective, right? I mean, if I have, 1 + 1, I have defined that as 2. Okay. So every time we encounter that in the future, well, it's by definition 2, because that's what 2 is, right? It's 1 and 1. And you just sort of extend that outward. Okay. So that's the one that's most reliable. And then, so there are sciences, and there's always kind of this, argument in the sciences that the closer you get to pure math, the more rigorous and the more reliable the science is. Okay, so physics, for example, is highly reliable because it's pretty much just advanced math in a way, and, with some other understandings attached to it. Chemistry, also, highly, highly reliable because it's so reductionist, right? And operating from those. So, there are certain things that we can constantly rely on. If you put 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen together, you're going to get water, right? I mean, we know that, and that's how it happens. Okay. So there are certain sciences that we can feel really, really confident in, and that are highly objective and, that are true whether you like them or not. Okay. Don't care if you think 2 + 2 should equal 5. It doesn't. Okay. So your feelings have nothing to do with it. Same thing about, the construction of water and so forth. Okay. So,
I'll do the pushback thing again.
Sure.
Of just because you're using science or math on something doesn't mean that proves that something. Like the amount of people that are mathematically or scientifically trying to quote unquote prove the Enneagram. It's like, just because you're using the Enneagram in those spaces doesn't equal the truth of the Enneagram.
Sure. And the problem is when they use the wrong tool for the wrong task, right? And they make these leaps of inference that are irrelevant to the science, okay? The science that they're stating, or they are misapplying the science or applying the science inaccurately to make some sort of claim. And honestly, this is one of the reasons that I don't care about the scientific justification of the Enneagram. Right? Whenever I hear somebody say, "Oh, Mario's the guy, science and the Enneagram, blah blah blah," no, I mean, I don't care about proving the Enneagram. Number one, because I don't think you can. All right. Number two, because I know that it works, And just through my empirical experience and, the empirical experience of many, many other people. And works is different from true. Okay. So is the Enneagram true? Sure, in some ways, and no, not in other ways, right? Depending on what claim we're making related to it. Okay. Are there only 9 kinds of people? Well, it depends what you mean by kinds, right? In my experience, has everyone I've ever met fallen into one of these 9 categories, arbitrarily defined, as striving to feel perfect or peaceful or whatever? So far, yeah. Okay, I could find that. Does that mean it's true? I don't know. It means it's valid for me. Okay. So, yeah, we got to be careful about what we are applying any science or any way of knowing to. And we run into the same thing when we say, oh, my heart really tells me that 2 + 2 = 4, or 5 or whatever. Oh, okay. Doesn't. So.
Or you feel it in your bones.
You feel it in your bones, yeah.
Right.
Well, again, and this brings us back to Klein, right? Klein's whole thing is, intuition and feeling something in your bones is on a continuum, okay? I trust a jet pilot to make quick decisions about what to do in a dogfight. I don't trust me, okay? Even though I trust my intuitions about other things, because that's what I do. Right? So, yeah, we always got to put these things into perspective. Now, as we go through the sciences, they, and get into what are referred to as social sciences, for example. But even if you go to biology, okay, which is, a science, and there are certain things in biology that we can absolutely rely on, right? Have been proven to or demonstrated to be highly reliable. But depending on what we're talking about, there's more wiggle room, right? Less reliability, more evolution in the theory. And then when you get into the social sciences like psychology and, sociology and that sort of thing, again, they get less reliable, but there are tools in place to increase the reliability of our ultimate assumptions that we come away with.
Sort of speaking to that about the degree of, I'll say certainty, degree of
Confidence.
degree of confidence around. That's better. Thank you. One of the reasons why social sciences change faster is that the thing that they are studying are people, or systems that evolve with culture and societal expectations and norms at a much faster rate than a physical body evolves, right? Like, and then we find out, like, what is it? For a long time, people were removing appendixes as though they were arcane things that we didn't really need, so you could remove it without concern. But more recent study has shown that actually the appendix is producing something useful, right? It isn't just vestigial or whatever the word is that's, elective. It's actually better to keep your appendix if you can, because it is still, as it turns out, providing a function. But we've sort of waffled back and forth on our thought about that in the interim time.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, were you going to say more there?
No, I was trying to finish my thought.
Okay.
So if you could do it for me, that would be awesome.
Yeah, and well, Lee, what you meant to say? No,
that's right. This is precisely what I was looking for. I think what you meant there was something like this. Yeah.
No, what I was going to follow up with is that science is, and any scientist will tell you this, Okay. And it's always the non-scientists who think that scientists don't understand this. It is always improving, right? It is always growing. It is always provisional. So, yeah, at this point, like I'm not familiar with the study that you're referring to about the appendix, so I can't comment on that. But say 5 years ago, if you had asked a a um, a rigorous medical professional or scientist, about the appendix, they'd say, well, as far as we can tell, it doesn't do anything, right? They wouldn't say, appendix is not, or not a good doctor, a good scientist would ever say, you don't need that, cut it out, get rid of it, no problem. And they'd say, well, here's what this evidence tells us so far. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the big movement in science these days, or for a while now, has been evidence-based medicine, right? What's the evidence? Okay. People take this pill. We track how it goes. We do a long-term broad study and we see what the evidence says. And if the evidence starts to change, we change our mind. But we follow rules of evidence, right? We have to make sure that we're doing a double-blind study, for example, that the person doing the study doesn't have a bias or an interest, financial or otherwise, in the study that can undermine it and all these sort of things, right? So there are rules for these things in doing them well. And when it comes to the Enneagram or anything else, if you claim to be doing science, but you're, wanting to rewrite the rules or throw rules out that you don't think are convenient, you ain't doing science, right? There's a guy named Rupert Sheldrake who, I'm sure some of our listeners are familiar with his work and some maybe even like him. The guy's a crackpot. Okay. He used to do, studies about the psychic abilities of dogs and, things like that. But he wrote this book about how science needs to change because, there are other ways of knowing. And so we, in order to progress science, we have to change the rules of science. No, you don't. If you don't get the results you want through a rigorous scientific process, then your results, the results that you want are just wrong. Okay. But if you get new data, practiced in effective, skillful ways, then we have to look at the scientific assessment up to that point.
So we talked about objective ways of knowing. Let's do some more subcategories of objective.
Yeah.
So we have like the sciences and sort of data collection, double-blind studies, all that sort of thing. What are some non-heady, for lack of a better word, objective ways of knowing?
Yeah. So, I don't know if this is non-heady, but, logic falls into this category as well, right? We can evaluate arguments based on logic and, okay, are they logically fallacious or logically solid? Okay. And there are two kinds of what are called logical fallacies, right? There's the there's the kind of logical error that is one of the premises is wrong. Okay, for example, Mario is a man. Mario likes peanut butter. Therefore, all men like peanut butter. Well, no, that just doesn't follow, right? So that is, that's a hard logical fallacy in a sense. Okay, so the assumption is incorrect based on, number one, that one, the conclusion does not follow the premises, right? And we know that not every man likes peanut butter, right? So we can falsify that. Okay. Now, there are logical fallacies that do not necessarily negate the argument, right? So, for example, an argument from authority, right? I might use an argument from authority. Well, this is true because Lee says so. Okay. Now, it may be true, but just because Lee says so doesn't prove that it's true. Okay. So we have to understand, okay, what is the kind of logical fallacies that's being made here and that's not? And maybe we can correct my terminology in the show notes or something, or an addendum to this, because I want to get the names right. So logic is a way of understanding things objectively. Again, it's not as hard and fast as math is, but it's a good tool to use. There is empiricism in general, right? And empiricism in general is just observation and data gathered through the senses. Okay, which is different from the speculation of reason. And not to say that reason is not useful, the kind of a rational philosophical approach where I do a thought experiment and work my way toward it. That can be valid too, but they're different here. Okay, so I gather things through the senses. This is hard because I'm tapping it and I can feel that it is hard. I'm taking that information through the senses. And this is where the Enneagram comes in, right? So the Enneagram might not be scientific, but there's good empirical data on it because you have all these people, working with it and seeing pretty much the same things over and over again, right? So, okay, that's good empirical data to support that there's some value in the Enneagram, even if it doesn't scientifically prove it. Okay, so empiricism is another. Now, again, there is the, kind of rationalist approach of, okay, I'm going to do a thought experiment. I'm going to visualize something and then see if I can work my way toward it and prove it. Again, it's a good way for understanding objective things if we follow the rules. So before we start moving into the Enneagram overcorrection, I want to acknowledge that, some people will say that faith or beliefs is a way of knowing, okay? And so that's kind of like another category that we want to establish. So last time we talked about some subjective ways of knowing things through the arts, music, visual arts, that sort of thing, feeling of a sunset. So I don't think we need to go through those again. But there is validity to myth. Right? There is validity to belief. There is validity and value to tradition. Okay? We can learn from these things. We can know from these things. As long as we keep in mind that that is not objective evidence of how the universe works in some way. Okay? So the golden rule is a great way of knowing something. Okay? And, being guided by faith in a divine being or something, can be a great way of knowing how I should live my life. Okay. As long as I don't say, you must accept this too. Okay. So I don't want to denigrate the value of faith, belief, myth, all these sort of things, because they can teach us things.
I won't get down this rabbit hole, but the only thing I'll push back on that is, you said as long as you have to believe this too. I think anyone who feels like they have a way of perceiving or engaging the world that they find really helpful will in some form or fashion, quote unquote, evangelize that way.
Yeah, I think they shouldn't.
Then you're guilty of it too.
No, right? Not necessarily. I mean,
well, then help parse that difference.
Sure,
because there's a difference between like, I have something useful, I think this will really help you.
But that's different from evangelizing, right? So, and again, my assertion was, as long as, you don't think I have to believe it as well, right? Because look, I have things that I teach people, and I, have things that I have learned and I think can be helpful to people, but I don't go banging on your door to tell you about it. Okay. And tell you, ill consequences are going to happen if you don't embrace what I believe, or think that legislation should necessarily reflect my subjective way of seeing the world at your expense in certain situations, right? So, I don't want to get us into politics here, but, we've got to be really, really careful about assuming that our belief about anything, I'm going to see the Odyssey this week, right? This weekend. And, I'm not going to come to you and say, you know what, Zeus tells you got to do this, you got to do that. And if you don't believe it, I'm going to cut your head off or throw you in jail or, take your rights away or something like that. You can believe Zeus wants you to do whatever Zeus wants you to do, all you want. And I'll respect that, great. If it brings you happiness, great. Okay. But, we have to be careful about forcing it on other people.
Well, and that, I think I can bring this back around. I'm going to give it the college try.
Why are we always saying that college kids try harder? Because I don't think they do.
Okay.
You know?
Fair point, Creek. I don't think they do either.
Continue.
You're right. I'm wrong. Objectively true. Okay. Talking about something you're saying, Mario, is like one person's rights end where another person's begin, right? My belief can be mine as long as I am keeping it to me. And I can share it with you, but I can't impose it on you.
Yeah, well, so I see. I think that's the difference, and I want to go back on something I said here, right, about legislation and so forth. Look, we all go to the ballot box and say, "Here's how I think people should act," okay,
right.
And we make decisions on that. But we have to be able to accept, okay, well, we live in a democracy, and I may disagree with what the majority or their elected representatives decided, but I've got to accept that. But then I have the right to, try to get out the vote and change the mind, all that sort of thing. So, I'm good with that. But if you're expecting me to embrace a metaphysical assumption about something that I just don't believe, well, I don't think you have the right to inflict that upon me.
Speaking of imposing personal beliefs on another person or limiting what you'll let in from somebody else, right? One of the things that we've been talking about is how different ways of knowing shows up in the Enneagram community or in doing this kind of work. And offline, we've had some conversation about different reasons why and how it comes up. And one of it being like there's sort of a pendulum swing from this inner work has more depth and breadth to it than just cognitive belief, right? It has... I'm taking a look at the patterns of my thinking. I'm taking a look at the patterns of my emotions or feelings. I'm taking a look at the sensations in my body and how those things impact my behavior or thoughts or feelings. And so sometimes it seems like in Enneagram spaces, and I know this is true in other types of inner work, but we're talking about the Enneagram specifically here. It comes to be that those other ways of knowing, heavy quotes, can be privileged over cognitive thought as sort of extra virtuous because we're trying to learn to explore these parts of ourselves. And so it becomes a more important way of knowing in some kind of way. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, let's.
Thanks.
All right, cool. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
Okay.
Either of you have something to say? Question mark.
Well,
there it is. Okay.
Yes. But believe it or not, I have things to say. But Creek, let's hear from you first.
Well, yeah. So, I'll bring in the dreaded centers. That there is constant strife among the ATA community. That there's some that are swear that they would never. Mickey, yeah. She would go on the record and say, like, you can pry centers from my cold dead hands, and then she let the center go.
The light. Yeah.
Yeah. And Lee and I have had multiple conversations of like, yeah, definitely not useful in some very specific ways, and then also in some specific ways, it is a helpful tool to help name some things, to help categorize some things. It's just, I don't think either one of us has like landed on something that stands up to long-term use.
So what do you mean by a center?
A center of intelligence?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Define the term.
Yeah.
Okay. Creek, would you like me to take a stab at it?
Yeah,
or do you have...
please.
Okay. The way I find it useful is to talk about the different functions.
Stop. Define the term first.
Okay.
I haven't actually finished what I wanted to say. We don't need to get into debate.
Okay. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No. It's okay. It's right.
It's
yeah,
none of it's okay.
Finish your thought.
Finish your thought.
I don't mean to distract us. I thought I detected a pause and I left in. So yeah.
Yeah. You detected a fight and you left in.
That was an elbow being thrown.
Uh-huh.
Just saying. It's fine.
So, case in point, we all
Mhm.
see things differently and find use cases for different things. And, you know, in my everyday life, I am learning, you know, sensationally proprioception, you know, exteroception, all those sort of ways in which our body senses things and takes in that data. So there's sense data, and then, you know, what story am I telling, the emotions, the context, using critical thinking to poke holes in the assumptions I'm making about different things. And it's helpful for me to have categories that I put those in, to be able to have some sort of cohesive way to make them interact and find something that's better and more clearer. Knowing what to weight when, as in weight, as in WEIGHT. And when I'm sick, I don't need to put a lot of weight in my emotions, because the other sense data is quite out of whack. I'm not going to be able to think clearly, so I need to know when to lean on things and when not to, and that's just a skill. And so we don't need to get into the conversation of whether or not centers are helpful, useful, should be used, shouldn't be used. I'm just thinking
That's another episode.
That's another 5 episodes.
It's like it's probably a season, but okay.
I'm seeing that. What I'm trying to answer your question is, in the Enneagram community,
Yeah,
as we've said multiple times, like taking something that is more mythological or metaphysical or metaphorical and making it a physiological reality. That's when it starts becoming unuseful, instead of just a convenient linguistic category to help parse through the world and the problems that you're encountering.
Yeah.
Fight with that.
No, no, there's nothing to fight with there, right? I mean,
Right.
you know, so for me, what we need to be careful of is the way we are using ideas and the conclusions we draw from them. Okay. I'll give a couple of examples. Okay. Now, if somebody comes to me and says, you know, I you know, my heart is pulling me toward, you know, moving to France or whatever.
And Mario's like, well, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's a part of me that says, now your heart's an organ that pumps blood. Okay, what's happening here is blah, blah, blah. But you know what? That's just stupid, right? I mean, okay, I know what you mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
You're not claiming that the organ that pumps blood in your chest is actually the thing telling you to move to France. But if you do come to me and say, you know what, this organ that pumps blood in my chest is telling me I need to move to France, I'm going to say, well, you might want to do a cost-benefit analysis and think about it in some other ways and so forth. Okay. So again, it's like, you know, I'm all for metaphor, and we have to be careful what we're doing. Now, where I get frustrated with the Enneagram world is that people will try to take these theories, okay, and they'll take, you know, the famous, you know, person sitting cross-legged with the circle at their belly and the circle in their chest and the circle in their head and the 3 circles above them, and they will start force-fitting pseudoscience to fit that model. And I'll give a very clear example. Okay. So there was an Enneagram teacher one time who started posting on social media about data from this organization called Heart Math that proved that the heart, the organ in our chest that pumps blood, sends out electrical signals that increase the well-being in other people and blah, blah, blah. And my response to him was, do you have any evidence to support that? And his response was, well, not the kind of evidence that would convince you, but it's evidence enough for me. I'm like, okay, look, that's fine. But you're making an objective claim here, a claim that can be measured in some scientific way. And you have a responsibility, okay, to back this up Because if people start believing this and people start teaching this, they're going to look like idiots, and you're going to undermine the credibility of the Enneagram. Okay. And so we have to start thinking to ourselves, am I making a claim that can be evaluated through scientific means? And if so, am I doing my due diligence to check my facts and evaluate or modify my claim on that basis? Okay. Now, if you were to tell me there's this thing called emotional resonance, okay, and we have to be conscious of how our emotional states impact the emotions of other people, I would say, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is something I teach my clients all the time because we know it to be true, right? But we do ourselves and the Enneagram a disservice when we don't respect facts and try to draw claims from them that are not justified.
Yes, and.
Okay.
Right. I think that some term defining here would be helpful. And part of what I'm hearing is that in some Enneagram circles, talking about the centers of intelligence, the types are divided into triads that are correlated with a center of intelligence, right? A single one that is setting up the relationship between the others, right? And part of what I appreciate about the ATA approach generally and specifically about this is that we're all human beings that are doing all of these things. So arbitrarily cutting it into segments like that and saying, well, because I'm a body-centered person, this is something about me, or because I'm a head-centered person, this is something else about me, or means something not about me. That, I think, is where the danger comes in, versus like we're already talking about.
Let me just be clear here. I wasn't referring to centers of intelligence with the heart math thing, so.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay. Yes. I'm talking about the Enneagram being a system, a model that's a language generating system to help us see ourselves better and understand processes that are happening.
Yeah.
Right. Where we may get stuck, where we may have innate skills, just patterns in how we human. And thinking about how we think, how we process emotions, and how we behave, slowing that process down enough to have an awareness of what we're actually doing, the patterns that are happening, and where we're getting hung up is useful, right? In my opinion, it is useful. But assigning primacy to one of them is not useful, right? It's not my emotions have a way of knowing that I want to move to France. It's that I have a sense in my body that that is what I want to do. I have a settled sense that the data has collected in such a way that I believe this is the decision I have made.
Yeah.
I'm settled on it.
Yeah.
And that feels, because it is in my body, a sensation or a emotion or a thought, that the energy of that being held in my body makes me feel like it's, I feel it in my bones. We're back to that, right? It seems like more than just a thought.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. And so I think that that's where looking at the process of the system is, again, choosing another way of choosing which tool to use for a thing. Like your to-do list, that you mentioned, your pro-con list.
Mm-hmm.
Let me think through it.
Yeah.
What are my emotions about how I feel about these things that I've thought through? And now what am I going to choose to do?
Yeah.
That's how the heavy quote centers are useful, in my opinion.
And that's fine. I think for this episode, I think we should hold off on discussion of the centers because it's a big topic, and I'm just kind of steering away from that. But but again, I'm happy to devote a whole episode to it.
Or 5.
Yeah, no, I think we could do it in one. But
1 or 2.
But my point is, again, if somebody tells me my heart's telling me to move to Paris. Great. I know what you mean by that. Okay. I know that you're talking about this undefinable gestalt that is the whole you, that is sending you messages that make you want to move there. I get that. I would never argue with somebody saying that. Okay. Again, what I said, if they tell me it's their literal heart, the organ that pumps blood, telling them that, well, okay. So for me, I am more concerned about the way that people in the Enneagram world allow their conflation of ways of knowing to allow them to embrace and propagate pseudoscientific nonsense, okay, and use quote unquote other ways of knowing as a get out of jail free card, okay, that we could talk about different modalities. I don't think we really need to do that, but you know what, there's a lot of pseudoscientific nonsense being peddled by and paired with the Enneagram and being propagated out there, okay, and okay, whatever, right? If you want to embrace that stuff, fine. But I think it does humanity and society a disservice. And I think if we are going to help people be seekers after truth, we need to understand what we mean by truth, be able to make these distinctions, and be willing to challenge assumptions and, and modalities and methodologies that we use and have become attached to just because subjectively they feel right to us, or subjectively they have worked for some people or seem to have worked with some people, without doing our homework.
Before we finish our conversation here with kind of more practical ways we can apply ways of knowing and critical thinking to our lives, Mario, I know there's a typical bee in your bonnet you like to get out at this point, so let's get that over with so we can sit down.
Can you narrow the topic down a little bit, Creek?
Okay.
I mean, I got like a whole hornet's nest in my bonnet.
Let's do the Jeopardy question categories.
History
in the Enneagram.
Yeah, well, I don't think we listed history as one of the social sciences. One can think of it's not quite a social science. It's not really science, but it's not subjective either. It's kind of, again, it's kind of lower on the reliability scale when it comes to the sciences, be they hard or soft. But there are ways of knowing what is historic, pseudo history, for example, and there are ways of knowing what is more reliable science. And I do think that there is an issue in the Enneagram world of this embrace of revisionist history, pseudo history to rationalize for some reason. To kind of frame the Enneagram in historical perspectives as if, the older it is, the better it is. That's a logical fallacy in and of itself, right? An argument from antiquity. I think we have to be really careful about the claims we make regarding the history of the Enneagram. And I think that there are some very, very sloppy claims out there being made about the history of the Enneagram, starting with the fact that often there's a failure to define exactly what I mean when I say that the Enneagram is old, right? If we're saying that the Enneagram of personality, as it's widely practiced, is old, well, it's old if you think the 1960s or 70s is old. Maybe old, but it's not ancient, okay? But if we start to claim that the Enneagram is old because there is some overlap between, the travails of Odysseus and, some of the Enneagram types, that's a jump, right? And that's just sloppy logic and twisting the science, or twisting history, okay, in a way to kind of let us see what we want. So we have to be really careful about historical claims of the Enneagram and always start with, okay, what exactly are you saying? Are you saying that there's some really old ideas that became the foundation for what we know of as the Enneagram of personality? Okay, sure. Just like every other damn thing in the world, right? But if we're making claims that, the Enneagram's ancient, what do you mean by that? What's your evidence? And, how solid is the evidence? I was listening to an Enneagram teacher do this thing about the Enneagram being, 30,000 years old at a conference. And she kept saying, well, I know this evidence wouldn't convince everybody, as she kind of looked over at me. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, because it's not evidence, right? It's speculation and leaps of inference and all that sort of stuff. So just have to be really, really careful about those things.
If you'd like a little bit more of a dive into the history of the Enneagram, you can head over to Fathom's an Enneagram podcast, where we did it's probably like a 3-hour episode or something on the history of the Enneagram, taken from Mario's perspective, awareness to action, as well as the narrative and the Riso Hudson School.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's transition. Go ahead, Lee.
And Dr. Jerome Wagner, PhD,
yes.
Patrick O'Leary.
Yes, we will have that up as well. All right, let's transition into our final movement here of how can we apply this well? How can we weight the data appropriately to be able to live better?
I have 2 thoughts. One of them's better than the other. I think that we could take a look at noticing something that comes up for this week that we have a strong reaction to. And whatever that, determine what the question is that we're facing and decide which tool we should use. Is this something that there is an objective answer to? Is this a fact-based question? Or is this an emotion-based question? And let it, or what were we saying at the beginning at the top? Is this true or is this valid? Like, just sort of decide where it falls in the spectrum of how much certainty we need to have about it. What was the word that you used earlier, Mario?
Confidence, degrees of confidence.
How much confidence?
Yeah.
How much confidence we need to have in it? Like, what's the right sized amount of certainty that we need to have in this? Or how defended about it do we need to be? Is it a chocolate and vanilla ice cream question? Or is it in a different tier than that? And just notice what our first tendency is, and if that changes once we sort of give it the chocolate and vanilla ice cream test.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of, I completely agree with that. And I think there are a lot of kind of specific ways we can do that, right? So, I always like to think of the immortal words of Jeff the Dude Lebowski. That's just your opinion, man. I think we should be really, really sensitive to, is an assertion being made an opinion or a fact claim? Okay. Even our own assertions, okay, and then treat them accordingly and respect them accordingly. Okay, if you've got an opinion about something that's different from mine, and okay, that's fine, right? I like chocolate, you like vanilla, or whatever. So that's okay. Or I think we should vote this way, you think we should vote that way. All right, whatever. But okay, that's not a fact claim. So we've got to get good at, recognizing it. Am I making a fact claim? All right, then what science, what tool do I need to use that? But when it comes to the subjective things, I think, and I'll put this out there because it might seem counterintuitive coming from me, we all need to get better at reading our emotional states and acknowledging and recognizing our emotional states and the impact, or let me say the weight we should put on any decision we make about how to live our lives and how to treat other people. Okay. So we should get better at recognizing when there is a difference between something I am feeling and a conclusion I have drawn, and then regretting going back and saying, you know what, my gut was telling me all along that I should have done this other thing, or I really felt in my heart, but I let sloppy reasoning or the opinion of somebody else steer me to make a choice that I shouldn't have made. Okay. So before you make a decision that has anything to do with a subjective thing, who should I marry? What neighborhood should I live in? What should I study in college? Should I go on a date with this person? Whatever it is. Okay. Get into what your gut is telling you. Okay, really read that, really feel that, really observe that, and weigh it, factor it in, right? Because the heart does tell us things that reason can't. Okay. So please, I would hope that if anybody's taking away any message, that, you know, I get this and it's important. And I encourage you to get better at understanding what you feel and how you should factor that into the kind of decisions and the way you live your life.
And what the heart, quote unquote, is telling you is maybe one message, but it's about 50 layers of if, ands, and buts, like a gestalt of a very complex situation that, again, you may not be able to necessarily identify, but it's like, man, that person, there's just something. I'm not sure I can trust that person. And
That's
and
right.
you may never know how to actually put words to it.
Yeah.
And you may be wrong. And you can repair that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you should respect that feeling. Yeah. Is your point. Yeah.
Properly weighted.
Yes.
Yeah.
But notice that the fact that it's coming up is pointing to something that is to get your attention, right? There's something to notice here. So let's take a closer look,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can do well to hone these skills by honestly embracing the arts, right? By really opening ourselves up to the power of story, right? Whether it be novels, whether it be film, whether it be, just mythology, okay, and so forth. These things have value. We should open ourselves up to being moved by music or by dance or by paintings or by sculpture or by nature. Right? We should put ourselves in the situation where we actively encounter these things and ask ourselves, what does this bring up in me? Okay, what am I feeling in the face of this? Again, when you're standing in front of Guernica or something, okay, I'm feeling something here. What is this? What does this mean? What's the lesson I'm taking away from that? Okay, this is what a full life is. You can't just say, well, Guernica, look, it's just it's 12 meters by 7 meters and it's black and white and it's this and it's that. So what? Okay. Science has nothing to do with that. Okay. But the feeling, the impact of it can teach us a lot about human nature.
And ourselves.
Yes.
All right. Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode. Please, if you have any comments or questions or snide remarks, you might get some after this episode. You can reach out to us through the links in the show notes.
Bring it on, baby.
Yeah. Okay. And
Mario's heart has done the math.
Yes. So remember, everyone, Mario, be kind with people and ruthless with ideas. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Cheers.
Thanks. Mario's outing himself as a big softie.
I don't believe any of this bullshit. I'm just saying, this is all just rebranding, man. What are you talking about?
Right. As his de facto crisis agent, I'm like, say something about the arts. I'm kidding.
Yeah.